I woke up the first time because my roommate's alarm didn't go off. Not the normal slept through it, kind of didn't go off. I mean, it was set. I watched him set it. I watched him place his phone face down on his pillow like an idiot because he insists the vibrations help. At 2:16 a.m., I was awake anyway. Old dorms make old sounds, pipes click, radiators sigh. The floor above you becomes a conspiracy of footsteps and dropped keys. At 2:17, my roommate's phone lit up, and then it unlit, like someone hit undo on the entire moment. The glow snapped away mid-fade back to black. My own phone, which had been open to a half-written text to my girlfriend, flashed and returned to the lock screen. The little draft bubble that had been sitting there was gone. My thumbs were suddenly resting in my lap like I hadn't been typing at all. Across from my bed, the no sleep poster my neighbor had taped in our shared hall earlier that day shifted, not moved exactly. It returned. The corner that had been peeling for days pressed itself flat again, like it remembered where it used to stick. Then the building settled, a normal amount of settling, like the dorm itself was exhaling. I sat up, heart punching against my ribs, and stared at the time, 2:17. I waited for 2:18 like it owed me an explanation. 2:18 came. My roommate rolled over and mumbled something about his 8 a.m. lecture. The radiator hissed. The hall light, which always flickered because facilities never fixed it, flickered in exactly the same pattern it always did. The world moved forward. The moment didn't. I tried to convince myself it was sleep deprivation. I was a sophomore. Midterms. Too much caffeine. Too much doom scrolling. That week I'd been waking up at random times with my brain still stuck in whatever I'd been studying, like my thoughts were buffering. So I didn't tell anyone, not the next day, not when it happened again the next night, and not when it happened the third night, and I was ready for it. Because the third time I did something stupid. At 2:16 I wrote the time on my hand with a pen. 2:16, I underlined it twice. I even blew on the ink like that would make it more official. At 2:17, the air did that weird, breathy thing again, like the building inhaled sharply through its teeth. The hall light flickered. My phone, open to my messages, snapped back, and the ink on my hand smeared, then vanished. My skin was clean. I stared at my palm until it started to prickle, like the nerves were offended I didn't believe them. Then I turned on my bedside lamp and checked the pen. It was in my drawer where I always kept it, cap on, like I never touched it. That's when the fear stopped feeling like a weird story I could laugh about later and started feeling like a math problem I couldn't solve. So I did tests, dumb, desperate tests. I taped a small strip of duct tape under my desk where I could feel it with my fingers but couldn't see it. I wedged a quarter between the window frame and the sill, so if it fell, I'd hear it. I moved a chair an inch away from the wall and took a picture. Every night at 2:17, the chair returned. The quarter stopped existing. The duct tape under my desk became smooth wood again. The picture on my phone stayed. That was the part that messed with me the most. Digital memory stuck, physical reality didn't. After the fourth night, I started leaving myself notes in my phone like some kind of discount time traveler. 2:17 reset again. Physical items undo, phone logs stay. The next night, when 2:17 hit, the note stayed. My phone buzzed with the reminder I'd set. I watched the buzz happen, watched the vibration ripple the sheet, and then watched the sheet ripple back as if it hadn't moved at all. My phone screen still displayed the note, but my roommate, still asleep, didn't react, didn't stir, didn't even swallow. It was like the reset didn't touch him, or like it did, and he just never remembered enough to be disturbed by it. I started watching the hallway. Our dorm, Carver Hall, was the kind of building campus tours pretended wasn't there. Brown brick, narrow windows, built when everyone smoked indoors and nobody cared about air circulation. It had character if you said it with a smile and mold if you said it honestly. The floor I lived on was the fourth. The RA was a senior named Kendall who wore university merch like armor and talked about community the way cops talk about safety. On the fifth night, I left my door cracked at 2:16 and sat on my bed, looking out into the hall. 2:17 came and the hall light flickered in its usual dying pattern, and for a split second, the hallway was different. Not dramatically, no blood, no ghosts. It was worse than that. It was emptier, like someone took a picture of our dorm and erased every personal thing from it. The bulletin board outside the elevator, normally layered with club flyers and passive aggressive reminders, was blank. The carpet looked newer, the scuff marks near my door were gone. Even the air felt less lived in. Then it snapped back. The flyers returned, the scuffs returned, the dorm resumed its cheap human reality. But I had seen the blank version, and in the blank version, there had been a door where there shouldn't be one. At the end of the hall, past the laundry room, there was usually just a wall with a fire exit sign pointing nowhere and a vending machine that ate dollars. In the blank hallway, that wall had a door with a metal push bar. No sign, no frame paint, just a door, like it had always belonged there. When reality snapped back, the door was gone. I didn't sleep after that. I went to my 8 a.m. lecture feeling like my skull was full of cotton and electricity. I sat through a professor talking about romantic literature and tried not to laugh when he said the word eternal. I lasted until lunch before I cracked and went to Kendall. He was in the tiny RA office on our floor, a closet with a desk and a corkboard that said, "You matter," in bubble letters. He smiled at me like he already knew what I was going to say. "You good?" he asked. "No," I said, because my mouth didn't understand subtlety anymore. "Something's wrong with this floor." The smile didn't change. The eyes did. His eyes narrowed just a little, like he was focusing a camera lens. "Okay," he said. "What kind of wrong?" I started explaining. The resets, 217, the chair, the tape, the door, the blank hallway. As I talked, his posture stayed relaxed, but his fingers tapped the desk in a pattern that felt like a code. When I finished, he nodded slowly, like I'd told him I had a leak in my ceiling. "Sleep's been rough?" he asked. "Yes," I snapped, "because the building is doing whatever that is." He leaned forward like he was about to give me a self-care lecture. Instead, he opened a drawer and slid something across the desk. It looked like a pamphlet, the kind they hand out during orientation. Cheap paper, campus logo, boring title. Carver Hall Resident Safety and Quiet Hours Guidelines. I stared at it. Kendall's voice softened. "Read it. Not in the lounge, not with friends. In your room. Alone." "Is this a joke?" I asked. "It's not," he said, and for the first time his smile went away completely. "And you need to keep your voice down when you talk about it." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "Why?" I asked. He looked toward the door of the office like he expected someone to be listening. "Because," he said carefully, "some things on this floor, notice patterns." Then he leaned back, smile back on, RA mask reattached. "Also," he added louder, like for the benefit of whoever might be walking by, "you should really try melatonin." I took the pamphlet and left. In my room, I locked the door even though it was daytime and everyone was awake. I sat on my bed and unfolded the pamphlet. The first page was normal, quiet hours, fire exits, don't prop doors, don't leave laundry unattended. The second page started normal and then turned into something that made my throat go dry. If you wake up and your phone shows 2:17 a.m., do not attempt to leave your room. Do not open the hallway door between 2:17 a.m. and 2:20 a.m. under any circumstance. If you observe an unmarked door at the end of the hall, do not approach it. Do not verbally acknowledge the time aloud while the hall light is flickering. If you hear knocks from inside a wall, do not knock back. If you find a printed copy of this pamphlet with handwriting on it, do not read the handwriting. If your roommate attempts to start a conversation during the event window, do not respond. If you feel a sensation of being watched from the laundry room, close your eyes and count backward from 30. Do not stop early. I flipped to the last page, half expecting it to be blank or a punchline. Instead, it had a small paragraph in tiny text, the kind nobody reads. For maintenance and emergency personnel, the sealed access point is located in the basement level east corridor. Do not attempt access without authorization. Report any manifestation of supplemental doors, altered signage, or temporal desynchronization to facilities liaison immediately. In the bottom corner, where the university logo should have been, there was a different symbol, a circle with three arrows inside it, like a simplified containment icon. Underneath were letters SCPF. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. I'd heard of the SCP Foundation, same way everyone had. Online stories, forums, people writing fake documents, internet creepypasta that felt too detailed to be harmless. But the paper in my hands was real. It smelled like toner and cheap ink. It had the slight texture of official campus print jobs, and the last page had a symbol that didn't belong in my world. I took a picture of the pamphlet with my phone, then I took another picture of the symbol. Then I folded it up and shoved it under my mattress like that would keep it from infecting my brain. That night, I did what the pamphlet told me not to do. I waited for 2:17. I sat in my desk chair at 2:15, fully dressed, shoes on, hoodie zipped, keys in my pocket. I'd made myself a plan and I clung to it like a life raft. If the hallway reset version appeared, I was going to see that door again. If that door was real, I was going to find out what it was. My roommate fell asleep around midnight, earbuds in. He snored lightly, a soft static in the background. At 2:16, I opened my phone notes and typed, "If you're reading this, it happened again. Do not panic." At 2:17, the doorman hailed. The hall light flickered through the crack under my door, and the air went thin. That's the only word for it, thin. Like the oxygen was stretched, like the room had become slightly too large for the amount of air inside it. My phone's cursor blinked, then the cursor blinked back, like it was syncing to a hidden metronome. I stood up and put my hand on the doorknob. The pamphlet said not to. My brain said I needed to know. I pulled the door open. The hallway outside was the blank version again. Clean carpet, no flyers, no scuff marks, no lived in mess. The vending machine at the far end was gone, and the door was there. It wasn't spooky. That was the worst part. It looked like a perfectly normal institutional door, beige paint, metal push bar, no label. The hall lights buzzed softly overhead. The buzzing felt synchronized with my pulse, which made me want to crawl out of my own skin. I stepped out. The carpet under my feet felt different, not newer exactly, more dense, like it had more fibers than it should, like the texture was too consistent. I walked slowly, afraid of making noise, even though the dorm was silent. I didn't say the time out loud. I didn't even think it too hard. As I got closer to the door, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A notification. I pulled it out with shaking fingers. No signal, no Wi Fi, but the notification was there anyway, like it didn't need a network. Carver Hall, resident safety. Do not approach the unmarked door. I looked up. The door's push bar was slightly scuffed, like it had been used, like someone had gone through it a lot. And then I heard something from the other side, not knocking, breathing, slow, careful breathing, like whoever was inside was trying not to be heard and failing. My skin went cold all at once. I backed up. The breathing stopped. I backed up another step. The push bar twitched. I turned and ran back toward my room, shoes muffled by the too perfect carpet. The hallway behind me stayed blank and quiet. No footsteps chasing me, no screaming, just that humming buzz of light. I slammed my door and locked it, pressing my back against it like it could become a shield. My roommate didn't move. At 2:18, my phone regained Wi-Fi. The world felt thick again. The hallway under my door looked normal. I sat on the floor until sunrise, shaking so hard my teeth hurt. The next night, 2:17 came sooner, not in the clock sense, in the pattern sense. At 1:58 a.m., the dorm inhaled. The hall light flickered. My phone text thread rewound a few lines, undoing a message I'd sent at 1:55. My heart dropped. The reset window had expanded. The pamphlet had warned me it would get tighter. It wasn't just resetting a moment, it was starting to eat time. Over the next week, it spread. First, it started at 2:05, then 1:53, then 1:32. Every night, I woke up earlier because my body learned that sleep wasn't safe. My roommate didn't notice. He complained about being tired. He joked about this dorm being cursed. He went on living like reality wasn't peeling open at the seams a little more every night. And the scariest part, some things started staying changed. A crack in the tile outside our door that used to undo itself at 2:17 stopped undoing. It stayed cracked. A poster outside the elevator that used to return to perfect alignment stayed crooked. It was like the loop was losing precision, or like it was getting tired, or like it didn't care about hiding anymore. One night, around 1:14 a.m., I heard the laundry room. Not the machines, not the thump of a dryer, something else. A low, wet sound like someone pressing their palm repeatedly into damp carpet. And then a whisper that was so quiet I wasn't sure it existed until my skin crawled. Again. I grab my phone and open my notes. The loop is expanding. It starts before 2:17 now. I hit save. At 1:15, my screen blinked. The note stayed. At 1:16, my door handle rattled. Not like someone trying to get in, like someone testing it with a gentle, curious hand. My roommate rolled over, still asleep. I sat frozen in my bed, holding my breath, counting backward from 30 like the pamphlet said. 30, 29. The handle stopped rattling at around 17. At 16, I thought I heard breathing outside my door. At 15, it was gone. By the end of the second week, I couldn't handle it alone anymore. I went back to Kendall. He was in the lounge laughing with a group of freshmen about some dumb TikTok thing. He looked up when he saw me, and the laughter drained out of his face like someone pulled a plug. I pulled him aside into the hallway. It's getting worse, I whispered. It's starting earlier. The resets are longer. It's doing something. Kendall nodded once like he'd already filed my words into a box labeled expected. Did you approach it? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, and my voice cracked on the confession. His jaw clenched. He didn't yell. That almost made it worse. Okay, he said. Okay, listen, we're gonna do this right. We? I asked. He looked down the hall, then back at me. You're not the first person to notice, but you're one of the few who keeps noticing. That sent a shiver down my spine. What does that mean? It means, he said, you're resistant. Resistant to what? He hesitated, like choosing words was dangerous. Whatever effect makes everyone else, go with it. He pulled out his phone, typed something, and held it to his ear. He didn't say hello. He didn't say his name. Just, we have a persistent observer. It's accelerating. Then he listened. His expression didn't change, but the muscles around his eyes tightened. He hung up and looked at me like I was both a problem and a person. Tonight, he said, you're coming with me. Where? Basement, he said. And you're going to pretend you didn't hear any of that. I almost laughed. How? He shrugged. Welcome to campus. That night, Kendall knocked on my door at 12:40 a.m. He wore a plain black jacket, no university logo. In his hand was a key card on a lanyard that didn't match campus ID design. Phone? He asked. I held it up. He shook his head. Leave it. It'll make this worse. I hesitated, then shoved my phone into my desk drawer and closed it like I was locking away my only witness. We walked down the stairs instead of taking the elevator. The stairwell smelled like dust and old sweat. On the basement door, there was a sign that said, "Authorized personnel only, mechanical access, normal dorm stuff." Except someone had added a tiny sticker in the corner, that same circle symbol with the three arrows. Kendall swiped his card. The door unlocked with a heavy click. The basement was colder than it should have been, not basement cold. More like walk-in freezer cold, the kind that makes your lungs tighten on every inhale. We moved through a corridor lined with pipes and electrical boxes. The farther we went, the less it looked like part of the dorm. The walls became smoother. The lights became brighter and more consistent. And then we came to a sealed door. It was steel, thick, and it had a card reader beside it. Above it was the symbol from the pamphlet, painted clean and sharp like it was a logo, not a warning. Kendall stopped a few feet away, like he respected it. "This is where it is," he said softly. I stared at the door. "What is it?" Kendall opened his mouth, then closed it again like the answer was bigger than words. Before he could try again, footsteps echoed from deeper in the corridor. Not rushing, not hiding, just approaching, steady and confident. A person rounded the corner. They looked like a contractor. Navy work pants, sturdy boots, plain jacket, a hard hat tucked under one arm, a clipboard in the other hand. They could have walked past me on campus and I wouldn't have looked twice, except their eyes were too calm, not relaxed. Calm like they had seen this exact moment happen 100 times and weren't impressed anymore. "Evening," the contractor said, voice level. Kendall straightened. "It's earlier." "It's accelerating," the contractor agreed, like they were discussing a weather front. Their gaze shifted to me. "You're the one noticing." I swallowed. "Who are you?" The contractor smiled faintly. "Facilities." Kendall made a sound like he wanted to argue, but didn't. The contractor stepped closer, stopping beside the sealed door without touching it. "You've done some unhelpful things," they said to me, still calm, approaching the supplemental door, leaving physical tests. My stomach twisted. "You know about that?" "We know because you're not the first," they said. "You're just the first in a while who stays persistent this long without degrading." "Degrading?" I echoed. The contractor glanced at Kendall, then back to me. "Sleep loss, emotional dysregulation, memory fragmentation, paranoia, eventually full compliance with the loop." "Compliance," I said, and the word felt wrong in my mouth. The contractor tapped their clipboard once. "We have two paths here." Kendall's voice was tight. "He's a student." "And you're an RA with a new job title," the contractor replied not unkindly. Then they faced me fully. "Option 1, they said. "We administer amnestics. You go back upstairs. You stop noticing. The loop continues until we stabilize it. You graduate. You forget you ever felt this fear." My throat tightened. The idea of forgetting sounded like relief and like death at the same time. "Option 2, they continued. You help us contain it because whatever's happening, it's using observers as anchors. Most people reset too cleanly. They're slippery. You're not." I stared at the sealed door. From behind it came a faint sound, like a hallway light buzzing, like time itself rubbing two wires together. "What is it?" I asked again, quieter. The contractor's smile vanished. "A localized temporal loop tied to a cognitive filter. It began as a containment measure and turned into a door." "A door to what?" I whispered. The contractor didn't answer that. Instead, they held out a pen. It looked like a normal pen, black plastic, click top, but the clip had the same symbol on it, engraved tiny. "This will work," they said. "It will keep ink from resetting inside the event window. It will let you leave marks." It will help you remember. My hand shook as I reached for it. Kendall's eyes flicked toward the corridor behind us. We don't have much time. The contractor nodded, like time was a creature stalking us. Your choice, they said to me, tone still flat, still gentle. Help us and you stay awake, or we put you back to sleep and you live a normal life. I looked at the pen, then at the sealed door, then at Kendall, who looked like he'd been holding his breath for months. How do I help? I asked. The contractor's calm cracked just a little, not into emotion, but into urgency. You don't go through the door, they said. Not yet, not ever if we can avoid it. They flipped the clipboard and showed me a page covered in neat printed checkboxes. At the top it said, Carver Hall event window, observer protocol. Below it were instructions that felt like the pamphlet's older, harsher sibling. Document any appearance of supplemental doors. Document any early onset of the event window. Document any auditory phenomena, breathing, knocks, spoken words. Do not speak to voices in the hallway. Do not open doors during flicker events. If you see the hallway blank, close your eyes and count backward. If the door appears inside your room, do not look directly at it. I swallowed hard. What happens if I don't? The contractor's eyes stayed steady. Then it keeps expanding. It eats more time. It eats more of the building. Eventually, it stops being a loop and becomes a permanent overlap. Overlap with what? I asked, and my voice was barely there now. The contractor's gaze flicked to the sealed door again. I can't answer that without making you less useful, they said. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Less useful, like my fear was a tool, like my sanity was a resource. I didn't know if I hated them for it or if I was grateful someone had an actual plan. The contractor clipped the pen to my hoodie pocket with a soft click. Good, they said. Now, before we go back upstairs, you need to know something. What? They leaned in slightly, lowering their voice. The loop didn't start because the dorm is cursed, they whispered. It started because this was the cheapest place to hide a problem. My mouth went dry. This building, they continued, was never meant to be a dorm. It was meant to be a lid. A vibration rolled through the corridor. Not from the door, from the walls. The lights overhead flickered in a pattern that made my stomach turn, like a heartbeat trying to sync with mine. The contractor straightened. We're close. Kendall's face went pale. It's starting early. The contractor nodded once. Back upstairs. Now. We moved fast, but not running, like running would attract attention. As we walked, the air thinned again. The cold sharpened into something metallic. Behind us, from the sealed door, came a sound I recognized immediately. Breathing, slow, careful, patient. But this time it wasn't on the other side of an unmarked door at the end of a blank hallway. This time it sounded like it was right up against the steel, like it had learned where we were standing. I forced myself not to look back. We reached the basement door and pushed through into the stairwell. The moment the door shut, the air felt thicker, warmer, human again. We climbed 2 steps at a time. Somewhere above us, the hall light flickered. Kendall swiped his sleeve across his forehead. What do I do? He asked the contractor, voice tight. You do what you've been doing, the contractor said. You keep everyone quiet. You keep them compliant. You keep the floor calm. Kendall flinched at the word compliant. The contractor looked at him like they understood and didn't care. Then they turned to me on the landing between floors 3 and 4. And you, they said, you're going to sleep as much as you can. I can't, I said, not with this. You can, they corrected gently, because if you don't, it wins. I hated how reasonable they sounded. We reached my floor. Everything looked normal. Flyers, scuffs, the vending machine down the hall, humming like it always did. No blank hallway, no extra door, just the dorm, pretending it was only a dorm. The contractor stopped outside my room. Keep your phone, they said. Digital memory helps. Don't rely on physical notes unless you use the pen. I touched the pen clipped to my hoodie like it was a talisman. If I change my mind, I asked, about the amnestics? The contractor's eyes softened just a fraction. Then tell Kendall, they said. We can make you forget. Does it hurt? I asked, hating myself for how small my voice sounded. No, they said, not after. Then they added, almost like an afterthought, try not to be awake at 2:17. I stared at them. But it's starting earlier now. Their calm smile returned, thin as paper. Exactly. They walked away down the hall, disappearing into the stairwell like they had never existed. Kendall lingered a second, looking at me like he wanted to apologize for the universe. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? I asked. He swallowed. For giving you a pamphlet, he said. For acting normal, for pretending this is manageable. He forced a smile again. RA stuff, you know. Then he left too. I went into my room, closed the door, and leaned against it, shaking. My roommate snored softly, headphones still in, face peaceful like the world had never rewritten itself in front of him. I pulled my phone from the drawer and opened my notes. My last entry was still there. The loop is expanding. It starts before 2:17 now. I added a new line, fingers trembling. I met facilities. They offered amnestics. I said no. I stared at the words until they felt real. Then I set an alarm for 2:10 a.m. Not because I wanted to catch the event window, because I wanted to be asleep before it started. I lay down staring at the ceiling. The radiator hissed. The building clicked and sighed and settled. Normal sounds, human sounds, but underneath them, faint and patient like a whisper between seconds, I could swear I heard the dorm breathing. And I realized the worst part wasn't the loop. It was the idea that the loop was a warning, a fence built out of repeated time, and whatever it was keeping out had started learning the schedule. So this blizzard, it forced me into this forgotten Russian village for Christmas. At first, the locals were terrified, and I thought I knew why. They talked about the upir, some kind of creature that hunts in the winter darkness. But then the night fell, and I saw the way they started looking at me, and this far more terrifying thought took root. They don't fear it coming for them. They fear it's coming for me. It all started when the engine died. Just a cough, a sputter, and then this profound silence that was, it was somehow louder than the whining engine had been. Outside my Lada, the world had just ceased to exist. It was nothing but a vortex of white, a horizontal blizzard that scoured the landscape clean. I was somewhere deep in the sprawling, indifferent emptiness of the Russian taiga, with a useless map, a dying phone, and a fuel tank that had been optimistic at best. The needle had been on empty for, I don't know, the last hour. It was my own damn stupidity, you know? Hope is a dangerous thing in a Siberian winter. But when I'd set out from the last town, this grimy industrial place that just smelled of coal smoke and despair, the sky had been this brilliant, deceptive blue. See, I was trying to be a travel writer back then, chasing a story about the old believers, these religious exiles who had fled to these remote corners centuries ago. I wanted to find a pocket of the world untouched by time. I just hadn't planned on finding it like this. The cold was the first thing to really break my resolve. It was like a physical presence, a predator that seeped through the car's seals, laid its icy claws on my skin, and just began to squeeze. The heating died with the engine, and within minutes, the inside of the windshield was feathered with ice. My phone officially gave up the ghost a few moments later. Its screen just went a final, sad black. Panic is a hot, sharp thing, but it's no match for the kind of cold that sinks into your bones. I knew that staying in the car was a death sentence, a slow, freezing one, so I did the only thing I could. I pulled on every layer I had, a thermal shirt, two sweaters, my thickest coat, I wrapped a scarf around my face until only my eyes were exposed, pulled my ushanka down tight, and stepped out into the storm. The wind just hit me like a physical blow, stole my breath, drove needle-sharp ice into my exposed skin. The world was a maelstrom of white noise and blinding snow. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. The road I had been on was already disappearing. I just picked a direction. The one I prayed was forward, and began to walk. Every step was a battle. The snow was already knee-deep and getting deeper, this thick, powdery trap that fought my every move. The wind howled, and my own ragged breathing was just this pathetic counterpoint. I have no idea how long I walked. Time just dissolved. My legs burned, my lungs ached, and the cold had turned my feet and hands into these insensate blocks of wood. I thought about my family, warm in their homes, clueless. I thought about the sheer, idiotic arrogance that had led me here. Just as this profound, dangerous weariness began to settle over me, the kind that whispers about the soft, final peace of giving up, I saw it. Through a momentary lull in the snow, a light. It was faint, a warm, yellow flicker in the oppressive blue-gray twilight. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Hope surged, gave me this fresh burst of adrenaline. I stumbled towards it, falling, pushing myself back up, my eyes just fixed on that single point of light. As I got closer, the light resolved into a window, and the window into a small dark shape. A house, an isba, and beyond it another, and then another. A village, a tiny hamlet of dark log cabins, half buried in the snow, huddled together against the storm. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, instantly torn apart by the wind. It felt like a miracle. I staggered towards the first house with the light, my legs barely cooperating. I pounded on the heavy wooden door with a numb fist. I was about to pound again when the door creaked open a few inches. A face peered out, old and deeply wrinkled, framed by a heavy woolen shawl. A woman, her eyes pale and wary, scanned me from head to toe. Pomogite, I croaked, the Russian word for help tearing at my raw throat. Please, my car, the storm. The woman said nothing. She just stared, her expression unreadable. Then she glanced over her shoulder, back into the dim warmth of the house, and muttered something I couldn't hear. A man's voice responded. The door opened wider. A man, as old and weathered as the woman, stood beside her. He was broad-shouldered with a great white beard that covered most of his chest. He looked me over, his gaze lingering on my modern clothes, my frozen, desperate face. There was no warmth in his eyes, only this deep, ancient weariness. And something else, something that, in my exhausted state, I couldn't quite place. It looked almost like fear, but that made no sense. Why would they be afraid of me? He grunted and nodded, stepping back to let me in. The moment I crossed the threshold, the world changed. The roar of the wind was instantly muted, replaced by the crackle of a large stone stove, a pech that dominated the single room. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, baking bread, and drying herbs. It was the most welcoming scent in the world. I stumbled further into the room, my body starting to shake violently as the warmth began to penetrate my frozen layers. The couple just watched me, silent. They offered me a stool near the stove, and the woman handed me a steaming mug of black tea. It burned my numb lips, but the warmth that spread through my chest was life itself. They didn't ask many questions. They didn't have to. I tried to explain my Russian clumsy and halting. Car broke down, walking for hours. They just nodded. The man who I learned was named Grigory said the blizzard was a bad one. It would last for days. I was welcome to stay. Their hospitality was this strange, silent thing. They gave me food, a thick, dark bread, and a hearty beet soup, but they barely spoke, either to me or to each other. It was more than just being reserved. There was a tension in the air, this palpable unease I could feel coiling in the shadows. As the evening wore on, a few other villagers came to the door, a younger man with a haunted look in his eyes, a woman carrying a small sleeping child. They brought small gifts of food and spoke to Grigori in low, hushed tones, their eyes constantly flicking towards me. They looked at me not with curiosity, but with a kind of dreadful appraisal, as if I were a stray animal they weren't sure whether to pity or put down. Grigori told me they had a small empty cabin at the edge of the village where I could sleep. It belonged to a family that had moved away. He didn't elaborate. He led me there himself. It was a simple, one room log structure, but it had a stove and a pile of firewood. It was more than I could have ever hoped for. Before he left, he paused at the door. "It is the eve of Christmas," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Orthodox Christmas, January 6th. A time when the veil between worlds is thin. Stay inside. Do not open the door for anyone, no matter what you hear." I just nodded, assuming it was some old superstitious warning. "I will. Thank you, Grigori, for everything." He just stared at me for a long moment, his expression dark and troubled. Then, without another word, he turned and was swallowed by the storm. I bolted the heavy wooden door, stoked the fire, and collapsed onto the simple cot. The storm raged outside, but in here, I was safe. I was warm. I was alive. I fell asleep thinking I had been saved. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first night was filled with the sounds of the storm and something more. I drifted in and out of sleep, and in those hazy moments, the blizzard seemed to take on a voice. The wind would sometimes dip into this low, guttural whisper. I heard scratching sounds too, a light, insistent scraping against the outer walls. I was half asleep, right? So I just dismissed it. The wind can play tricks. Houses this old crone. I was a city boy. I pulled the rough wool blanket over my head and forced myself back to sleep. I woke the next morning, on Christmas Day, to a world transformed. The blizzard hadn't stopped, but the violent wind had died down. Looking out the single, small window, I saw a landscape of impossible, uniform white. The snow was piled in deep drifts against the cabin, burying it almost to the window sill. The silence was absolute, the kind of profound quiet that presses in on you, muffling the world. After the hell of the previous day, it felt peaceful, deceptively so. My clothes were dry, my stomach rumbled. I decided to venture out, to thank Grigori again. Opening the door was a struggle. A drift had piled up against it. I stepped out into a world that felt brand new and ancient. The village was almost completely buried. Only the dark, peaked roofs of the izbas were clearly visible, with narrow paths dug between them. As I made my way towards Grigori's house, I started to notice the details. Above the door of every single cabin, including my own, a strange symbol was carved into the wood, a complex, geometric pattern, like a stylized snowflake in a circle. The carvings weren't old, the wood within the lines was pale, fresh. They had been recently retraced, looked like some kind of protective ward. I found Grigori clearing a path. He grunted a greeting. His wife, Elena, emerged and handed me a chunk of dark bread and a steaming cup of tea, her face as impassive as ever. I thanked them. "Quite the storm," I said in my clumsy Russian. Grigori just nodded. "It is the time for it." "I noticed the carvings," I said, pointing to the symbol above his door. "On all the houses. Is it for Christmas?" Elena shot a quick, sharp look at her husband. Grigori stopped shoveling. His face was grim. "It is for Kolyada," he said, using the old pagan name for the winter solstice, "to keep the darkness out." "The darkness?" He looked at me, his eyes like chips of ice. "The Ooper." The name just hung in the frigid air. Ooper. Now, I'd read about them in my research, the old Slavic word for a vampire, a restless soul that rises from its grave. "The Ooper," I repeated, a small nervous laugh escaping my lips. "A ghost story." "Here," Grigori said, his voice flat and heavy. "It is not a story." He told me then, in short, clipped sentences, that the village was cursed, that in the deepest part of winter, the Ooper awakens. It's a creature of the cold and the snow, a thing that was once a man, a sorcerer buried in the forest centuries ago. When the blizzards come, it rises, it hunts. We stay inside, Grigory said, his knuckles white on the shovel. We bar our doors. We have our symbols, our prayers. We wait for the dawn. A shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The way he spoke, the utter conviction in his voice, it was unnerving. This wasn't a quaint local legend. This was a survival guide. As I walked back to my cabin, the silent village suddenly felt different. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was watchful. The forest now felt menacing. I told myself it was ridiculous. They were an isolated, superstitious people, but I couldn't shake the dread, the scratching I'd heard. Grigory's fearful eyes, the fresh carvings. Later that day, Elena came to my cabin. She carried a small wooden bowl of kasha, a warm porridge, and her face seemed slightly softer. She saw me looking out the window at the forest. You must not be afraid, she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Grigory told me about the Ooper, I replied. It's hard not to be. She set the bowl down. The Oupir is old, older than this village. It sleeps in the frozen earth. But when the long dark of winter comes, it grows hungry. She paused. It is drawn to life, to warmth in the cold. It is especially drawn to new blood. Her words sent a jolt through me. New blood, an outsider. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It has been many years since one has been lost in the storm, she said. Her eyes, they finally met mine. There was this profound sadness in them, a pity that was terrifying. The creature, it grows impatient. I misunderstood her completely. In my fear, I heard her telling me that I was in danger, that because I was an outsider, the Upir might target me. So it will come for me? I asked, my heart pounding. Elena looked down. It is said the Upir must be appeased. A gift offered during the Koyata can sate its hunger for another generation. It will take the offering and leave the rest of the flock in peace. A gift, an offering. It sounded like something out of a dark fairy tale. What kind of gift? I pressed. She looked up at me again, and her eyes were now glistening with unshed tears. She didn't answer. She just gave a small shake of her head, turned, and left, leaving me alone with the warm porridge and this cold, coiling serpent of fear in my gut. I spent the rest of the day in a state of escalating anxiety. I tried to reason with myself. This was crazy. Folk tales. But every time I looked out the window, the village seemed to confirm its own dark story. The people were fortifying their homes, preparing for a siege. As the pale afternoon light began to fade, the true, horrifying realization began to dawn. It was a slow, sickening crawl. I was thinking about Elena's words, a gift, to sate its hunger, leave the rest of the flock in peace. I thought about the cabin they gave me, set apart from the others, at the very edge of the village, closest to the woods. I thought about the looks in their eyes, not curiosity, but appraisal, a dreadful, calculating pity. And then I saw it. Through my small, frosted window, I saw Gregory walking toward my cabin. He wasn't carrying food or firewood. He was carrying a hammer and a long, thick wooden plank. Another man was with him, carrying a similar plank. They weren't looking at my door. They were looking at my window. My blood ran cold. And that's when it hit me. They weren't afraid for themselves. No, they were afraid it was coming for me. And they weren't trying to protect me. They were making sure I couldn't get out. The symbols on the doors weren't to keep the creature out of their homes. They were to guide it, to mark their own homes as safe, leaving one unprotected. The porridge from Elena wasn't an act of kindness. It was a final meal. They were locking me in. I was the gift. I was the sacrifice. I panicked. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath came in these short, ragged gasps. This couldn't be happening. It felt like some kind of medieval nightmare. I looked around my small prison. One room, one door, one window. I had already heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy bar being dropped into place on the outside. A dull, final thud. Now the rhythmic, sickening sound of a hammer striking nails began. They were boarding up the window. I was trapped. A piece of meat left in a cage. The sun had now completely set. The world outside descended into this deep, velvety darkness, and then there was only blackness and the single flickering flame of my lantern. The hammering stopped. A new kind of silence fell. It was the silence of a village holding its collective breath. I stood in the center of the cabin, shaking. My mind raced, searching for an escape, but found none. Every detail, every strange glance, every hushed word now made perfect, terrifying sense. My life, the life of an outsider in exchange for their peace. The hours crawled by. I kept the stove fed, the small iron box glowing red hot. I sat on the edge of the cot, just listening, but there was nothing, only the faint sigh of the wind and the frantic beating of my own heart. Maybe I was wrong, maybe I had gone mad. That's when I heard it. It wasn't the wind, it was a soft, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch. In the snow outside, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy. I froze. Hello? I called out, my voice a pathetic, trembling squeak. Grigori? The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Silence. And then a soft scratching began at the door. Not an animal. The slow, deliberate scrape of a single fingernail tracing lines in the wood. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Go away, I whispered, backing away until my back hit the far wall. The scratching stopped. And then a voice, right next to the door, a voice that was barely a whisper, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves. It whispered my name. How the fuck did it know my name? Nobody in that village knew my name. I never told them. The sound of that voice, it shattered the last of my denial. The Oopir was real, and it was here, for me. The scratching started again, harder this time. Wood splintered, then a low, guttural growl, a sound of pure malevolence that vibrated through the logs. A heavy thump hit the door, making the entire structure shudder. It was testing the cage. I scrambled for a weapon. The only thing I could find was the iron poker from the stove, short and heavy, but it felt like a child's toy. Another thump, harder this time. A crack appeared in the thick oak. The creature outside was strong, inhumanly so. And I just got angry. A hot, fierce anger cutting through the panic. They expected me to just wait here and be devoured. I was not going to die for them. I was not going to be their offering. I had to get out. The door was impossible. The window was boarded shut. I ran to it, peering through the cracks, but I could see nothing but darkness. The creature at the door let out a shriek of frustration, a high-pitched, terrifying sound. The pounding stopped. Where had it gone? Then I heard a new sound, a scratching and scrambling noise from above. It was on the roof. I looked up. I could hear it moving up there, its weight making the timbers groan. Scrape, scrape, dig. It was trying to tear its way through the roof. My eyes fell on the stove. It was roaring now, the metal cherry red with heat. Fire. It was all I could think of. All ancient monsters were afraid of fire, right? It was a completely nuts, suicidal plan, but it was the only one I had. If I couldn't get out, I would burn the whole damn place down around me. The scraping on the roof grew more frantic. Wood splintered. A large splinter of wood fell from the ceiling, followed by a shower of snow. A dark hole appeared. A single long, pale finger tipped with a black, broken nail poked through, twitching, feeling the air. I screamed, a raw sound of pure terror. That was it. No more time. I grabbed my sleeping bag, ripped it open, and threw it against the wall. I piled my spare clothes, my books, anything that would burn. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. I grabbed the lantern, its flame dancing wildly, and I threw it onto the pile. Whoosh! A wall of flame erupted, climbing the dry log wall with terrifying speed. Black smoke billowed out, filling the small cabin in seconds. The heat was immense. The creature above shrieked again, a sound of surprise and maybe pain, as smoke poured out of the hole. It scrambled back. The fire was consuming the wall. I backed away, coughing, my eyes streaming from the smoke. I moved towards the window, the poker held tight in my hand. It was my only chance. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed the iron poker into the crack between the window planks. The wood groaned. I slammed it again and again. A nail screeched as it was pulled loose. The creature was back at the door now, pounding with renewed fury, as if it knew its meal was trying to escape. The smoke was so thick I could barely see. The heat was blistering. I knew I only had seconds. I gave one last desperate heave on the poker. With a loud crack, the bottom plank splintered and broke free. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the poker and dove headfirst through the opening, out into the biting, clean, cold air. I landed hard in a deep snowdrift. I scrambled to my feet, gasping, and looked back. The Isba was an inferno, a roaring column of fire and black smoke, painting the snow in a terrifying dancing orange. From the front of the burning cabin, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall, impossibly thin, like a skeleton with rotted fur draped over it. Its skin was corpse pale, stretched tight over a gaunt, skull-like face. It had no hair. Its eyes, its eyes glowed with this faint, wolf-like luminescence, two burning embers of pure hatred in the darkness. It opened its mouth in a silent snarl, revealing a row of jagged, blackened teeth. It was the Ooper, and it was staring right at me. It took a step towards me. I was paralyzed with fear. This was it. I had escaped the fire, only to face the monster. But then, from the other side of the village, shouts erupted. The fire was too large to ignore. It had woken them up. The Ooper turned its head towards the sounds, a look of what seemed like fury on its desiccated features. It looked back at me, its glowing eyes boring into mine, a silent promise of future torment. Then, with a speed that was terrifying, it turned and just melted back into the shadows of the taiga, gone. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. I plunged into the deep snow, away from the burning cabin, away from the village, and into the dark, silent forest. I ran without looking back. The image of those glowing eyes burned forever into my mind. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs just gave out from under me. I fell and crawled and pushed myself back up, driven by a terror I had never known. The blizzard had fully subsided, leaving a deathly still, frozen world under a sky choked with stars. The forest that had seemed so menacing was now my only refuge. I hid, shivering in a thicket of pine trees, watching the orange glow in the sky from my burning prison slowly die down. I stayed hidden until the first hint of dawn. The rising sun was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. With its light came this fragile sense of safety. I knew the creature, whatever it was a thing of the night. I stumbled through the snow for what felt like hours. Finally, I broke through the tree line and saw it, the road, a long black ribbon cutting through the endless white. The world was real. A logging truck was the first vehicle to come along. The driver, a big man with a kind face, looked at me with wide eyes, at my soot-stained face, my torn clothes, my wild, terrified expression. He didn't ask too many questions. He just opened the door, let me into the warm cab, and handed me a thermos of hot coffee. I didn't tell him the full story. I mean, I never told anyone. How could I? Who would believe me, right? I told the police I got lost in the storm, my car broke down, and I took shelter in an abandoned hunting cabin that accidentally caught fire. They found my burned out Lada a week later. Of the village, I said nothing. As far as the official record is concerned, that village and the people in it do not exist. Sometimes I wonder if they ever did, but I know they did, and I don't think they were evil. Not really. In their heads, they were just survivors, making a hard choice in a hard land, following ancient rules to protect their families. They were feeding the wolf to keep it from their own door, and I was the one they chose to feed it. I escaped, I survived, but I never truly got away. Some nights when the wind howls, I can still hear the scratch of a fingernail on a wooden door, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I see them. Two embers glowing in the dark. It feels like it's watching me, waiting. I got out of that village, but with a certainty that freezes my soul, I know the Ooper remembers my name. Hey there, it's me. I just want to say thank you guys for listening to tonight's story. I drive nights for Ride Hill because it's predictable. Less traffic, less drama, fewer people who want to talk. The city feels like it's running on low power, like somebody turned down the volume. I keep my car clean, dash cam always on, same routine every night. When you're on the road that long, you start believing in routines like their armor. That night was a Wednesday, the dead kind of weekday where you can sit 10 minutes without a request. I remember checking the time because I was thinking about calling it early. 2:17 a.m. The request came in. No full name, just initials, pickup, Jalan Ulin. I didn't like it, not in a dramatic way, more like a quiet no in my stomach. Jalan Ulin is one of those roads people joke about, but the jokes always come with rules. Older drivers say, don't accept rides there after midnight. Don't stop if you smell flowers. Don't look in the mirror if the passenger is too quiet. I don't really believe in ghost stories, but I do believe in patterns. And I've noticed a pattern. The drivers who laugh loudest about ghost roads are the same ones who refuse to drive them. The surge ticked up. The map said 10 minutes. I accepted. The road that eats light. Jalan wasn't far from the highway, but it felt like leaving the city. Streetlights thinned out fast. The buildings turned into closed shutters and tired fences. Then the trees started, tall and heavy, leaning over the road like they were trying to listen. My phone signal dropped to 1 bar. The GPS still worked, but it loaded slow, like it was dragging its feet. The pickup point wasn't a house. No gate, no porch light, just an empty stretch of road and a shallow ditch. The app said, arrive. I slowed and scanned for someone with a phone. That's when I saw her, standing at the edge of my headlights. A woman in a plain white dress, long black hair hanging straight down, bare feet on the roadside. She didn't wave, she didn't step forward like normal passengers do. She just stood there like she already knew I'd stop. I pulled over and unlocked the doors. She came closer, slow, careful steps, not limping, not drunk, just measured. She opened the passenger door and got in. The car dipped slightly with her weight, normal, but the seatbelt sensor didn't chime. Sometimes it glitches. I told myself that. Then the smell hit. Flowers, not a light perfume, not something nice. Thick, sweet flower smell like a room full of funeral wreaths. The app set the destination automatically, a private hospital across town. I did my routine anyway. Hi, confirming you're going to the hospital? No answer. I tried once more, calmer. Miss? Still nothing. She sat straight, hands in her lap, face angled down like she didn't want me to see it clearly. I drove. The first wrong thing. Silence is normal in my car, but this silence felt intentional, like she was holding the air still. I tried turning on the radio. Static. Change station. Static again. The smell of flowers got stronger, as if the air vents were pushing it into my face. Then I heard a sound from the passenger side. Tap, tap, tap. Soft. Rhythmic. Fingernails on the inside of the door, like someone drumming lightly. I kept my eyes forward. Everything okay? The tapping stopped for a few seconds, then it started again, slightly faster. I told myself, nervous habit maybe. Some people tap when they're anxious. Some people hate silence. But something about it was too neat, too patient. Like it wasn't a habit, like it was a signal. Do you hear, baby? When we finally reached brighter streets, I felt relief. Traffic lights, cameras, a motorcycle passing, the normal world. Then the smell shifted, still flowers, but underneath it, sourness, sweet rot, like fruit left out too long. I cracked my window. Cold air rushed in. That's when she spoke for the first time, calm like she was asking for directions. Do you hear baby? My throat tightened. I forced a normal voice. No, she said, you will. A thin crying started inside the car. Not outside, not far away. Inside, small and wet and wrong, like something new and fragile trying to breathe. I felt my hands shake. I hated it. I hate feeling controlled by fear. There's no baby in my car, I said, like saying it would make it true. She didn't answer. The crying stopped abruptly. Then, after a pause, she said softly, not yet. The GPS rewrote. The app rerouted off the main road. At that time of night, it made no sense. No traffic, no closure, just a sudden insistence to take a narrower side road. I should have ignored it, but I didn't. The side road got darker the farther we went, like the streetlights were giving up. Trees pressed in again. Fences replaced storefronts. The flower smell surged, thick enough to make my eyes sting. The crying returned, louder, like it was closer to my headrest now. Then she said, calm as ever, look at me. I didn't. I'm driving. Look at me. I kept my eyes fixed on the road so hard my vision felt sharp around the edges. Then she said something that turned my blood cold. She said my real name, not the app name, not my driver profile, my real name. I felt the air leave my lungs. How do you know that? Silence. Then a soft laugh, like she found my panic polite. The mirror. I didn't turn my head. I made myself do the safe thing, check the rearview mirror instead. For half a second, the passenger seat looked empty in the reflection. Then she appeared, not sitting back, leaning forward too close to the space between the seats, smiling wider than it should be. Her eyes looked unfocused, like cloudy glass. I snapped my gaze back to the road, heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the crying. Her voice came right next to my ear, like she wasn't in the passenger seat anymore. Almost there. The hospital that wasn't a hospital. The GPS insisted we were near the hospital. I saw a sign ahead, hospital sign, but it looked old, faded, repainted by someone who didn't care if it looked right. The road into the hospital was too narrow. No security booth, no cars, no bright windows. The building behind it was dark, like it had been abandoned. Hospitals don't look like that. Not private ones, not in the city. She said, stop here. I didn't. She repeated sharper, stop. The crying swelled, louder, layered like more than one voice now. The air in the car felt thick, pressurized. Then I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder, not cold like her hands are chilly, cold like metal in winter, cold like something that doesn't have blood in it. I jerked. The car swerved. I slammed the brakes and pulled over, breathing hard. I didn't know what to do except speak like a person who still has rules. Get out. She didn't move. She said softly, almost kindly, if you look at me, you can go. Everything in my body screamed not to look. Like looking was permission, like looking was signing something. So I did the opposite of folklore. I made noise. I hit the hazards and blasted the horn loud and ugly, filling the night with a sound too human to ignore. The crying snapped off like someone cut a wire. Her grip loosened. I locked the doors and floored it. The weight in the back seat. As I sped away, the car felt heavier. Not engine trouble, not a flat tire. Like the back seat was suddenly full, like something had climbed in behind me. The crying returned, louder, layered, hungry. Her laugh came from everywhere at once, like it was inside the car panels. I didn't want to look. I reached into my console without thinking and grabbed the small packet of salt I kept for just in case nonsense. I ripped it open and threw salt over my shoulder into the back seat. A hiss cut through the crying, like hot metal plunged into water. The air popped, the pressure in the car released. The weight lifted instantly. The crying faded, then stopped. And for the first time since Jalan Ulan, the car felt like my car again. Under bright lights, I made it to a 24-hour petrol station and parked under the brightest light I could find. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely put the car in park. The passenger seat was empty. No woman, no white dress, no hair. The app still showed the ride active like she was still in vehicle. I ended the ride without choosing a reason. Then I checked the dash cam footage. The audio caught the tapping. It caught her voice. It caught me asking questions. But the part where I thought I saw the hospital sign, on video, there was no hospital. Just trees, just darkness. And for 2 frames, the back seat showed a pale shape crouched low, smiling toward the camera. What the older driver told me. A couple nights later, I told an older driver what happened, careful with my words so I didn't sound crazy. He didn't laugh. He just said, Jalan Ulan, like he already knew. He told me if you smell flowers at night, don't pick up. He called it by the old name, Pontianak. A woman in white, tied to childbirth and death, drawn to quiet roads and lone drivers. He said she asks you to look because looking is acceptance. It's how you bring her home. That night, when I got back to my parking lot, I checked under the back seat mat. There was a small, dried smear, dark brown, crusted, When I scraped it, it crumbled, and when I brought my fingers too close, I smelled flowers again, sweet, rotten, exactly like Jalen Ulan, the part that sticks. I don't drive nights anymore, but sometimes when my room is quiet and my phone is face down and the city outside goes still, I swear I hear a thin baby cry, just once, then a soft laugh, patient, like something that knows I broke the rules and it's waiting for me to make the same mistake twice.